So NERSA will use the payroll data from revenue to identify any eligible employees that work for you. And that will be pretty straightforward for your employees, as most of them are already going to have that earnings record with revenue. But remember, there is a 13-week look back period that is applied here. So first up, NERSA will use the look back period to identify those eligible employees. They'll then go on to send you, the employer, an AEPN, and that is an automatic enrolment payroll notification through the software. You'll receive this, and then payroll will apply the AEPN to the relevant eligible employees. You'll then just continue processing the payroll as you normally would, and once everything is done and dusted, then you'll go ahead and submit the contribution over to NERSA. Now, there is a deadline of that, just a bit of a heads up there. That is 6:30 p.m. on the pay date of the employee. What then will happen is NERSA will then collect that contribution, and that's usually going to be through the direct debit that you'll have set up on the employer online portal. So we did talk a bit about that in part 1. That portal is live now, so a lot of you might have already registered and set that direct debit up. And then last but not least, they will then go ahead and proceed with investing those contributions. So those key 6 steps, that's what the new process will look like in a nutshell. Like I said, a lot of that will just be happening behind the scenes. But we'll be going ahead and bringing that to life when we process our first period in our new tax year. We are now at start of period 1 for our weekly payroll with a pay date of the 2nd of January, which I can review just in this screen down at the bottom right. So you can see my pay date is set to the 2nd and my status is now changed to start of period. So if we move on to the next step of the process, and that is retrieving our RPNs. So again, this is something that a lot of you will be familiar with, but before we go ahead and retrieve any notices, I do just want to look at an employee record. So you can see if we look at Effie's record, and if I check the tax PRSI tab, so we can see she has no RPN number in here at the moment, and last year's USC cut-off point in there. And if we look at the auto enrolment tab, we can see there's no information in here at the moment for Effie. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and retrieve my RPNs first. This will be no different from what you do every pay period. So I'm going to connect to my ROS cert. This will connect to ROS and pull the latest RPNs from revenue. So you can see I've successfully retrieved RPNs. And as expected, we can expect to see changes here. So if we just use Effie as an example, we can see her USC rate cutoff has now updated. I'm going to go ahead and import those changes. Got my summary page, 10 employees updated, which is exactly what I would expect in my period 1. So I'm just going to finish. And what you'll notice now is there is now a new message, a reminder for me to go ahead and retrieve my AEPN notices. Now, as this is something new in the process, Payroll will remind you a lot along the way to complete this new important step. Now, I am just going to say no for now, just so I can show you a bit more of the messaging that Payroll will have to remind you going forward. So if I was to click no to that reminder, if I was going to skip ahead to now try and enter my time and pay, see the system will in fact remind me again. So a lot of reminders in place to make sure you don't miss this new important step. So I'm going to say yes to this now. And this will be the screen you will use to retrieve your auto-enrollment payroll notifications. And you can see it looks very similar to retrieving your RPNs. So I would enter my ROS certificate details and click next. It'll connect to nurses, and retrieve any details that need updated. So you can see it's actually found information for 4 of my employees. If I check the information tab, you can see my auto-enrollment status for Effie is changed from not enrolled to active. And it has her auto-enrollment start date and her contributions on there. And that is the same case for my other 3 employees. And this is also the page where you would see any opt-outs or suspension notices as well. But you won't see them till a little bit further down the line because they will need to be in the scheme for 6 months before those options will become available to them. So I have 4 employees that have been deemed as eligible and will be going into my future fund. So I'm going to go ahead and import those changes as well. And you can see very similar to retrieving RPNs, we now have a summary page, and I can see that the 4 employees have successfully been imported. So I'm going to go ahead and finish. So I've retrieved my RPNs. I've also retrieved my APNs. Do you just want to return to Effie's record so you can see how that now looks? So you can see if we go to the tax and PRSI USC tab, we now have the updated USC cutoff point, and RPN number is now generated. And if we go along to the auto enrollment tab, you can see this is looking a lot different. We now have an active status assigned and her contributions in there. Now, none of this can be amended as obviously contributions are fixed. There are no changes allowed. And she has her RPN, APN number in there as well. So you can see that the changes that it's made to Effie's records once we've retrieved those notices. So now I've retrieved my notices, I can go ahead and enter my time and pay. I'm going to use the batch entry method. And what you'll notice in this page is you'll notice we have a new deduction tab for the auto enrolment pension. So you can see there we have our 4 employees have a deduction. If we look at detailed entry for Effie, we can see it in the deductions here. And of course, they are grayed out. As I mentioned, there are no changes to that amount allowed. And that will pull through automatically. You don't have to set any deduction up. That is already in the program and will be applied automatically when you import your APN notices. And if we have a look at the payslip, you can see that is how the deduction will appear. So you can see the auto enrolment pension deduction and the employer pension contribution as well. So I'm happy with that. I've got no other changes in my payments to enter this period. So I'm going to go ahead and save my valid records. So I'm going to go ahead and run my end of period. Obviously, if you do run any view controls or your gross report, you would do so at this time. But I'm happy with my figures. I'm going to go ahead and run my end of periods. I'm then ready to make my submission. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send my normal payroll submission to revenue. Again, this is a step that a lot of you will be very familiar with by this point. I'm going to go through and get those submitted for my employees. Now, as well as sending my payroll submission, I'm going to send my auto-enrollment contribution submission as well. And this is an additional step in 2026. And remember, there is a deadline for this submission. That is 6:30 p.m. on the employee's pay date. So again, this looks very similar to submitting your information to revenue. You will connect to your cert. You can see I've got my summary. I can see there's 4 employees on there. So that is all looking good for me. So I'm now ready to go ahead and submit this to NERSA. And I have a nice completed tick on there. Now, there are a couple of logs and reports that you can use to keep a track of your auto-enrollment. So we do have the auto-enrollment contribution submission log, and that you can find that in your direct payroll reporting. And then you can view the submission log, and you can see the submission that we've completed and just sent to NERSA there. Another report that isn't quite available yet is the AEPN log. So you can see if I go to direct payroll reporting, go to AEPN. If I try to view that log now, I get this error. So you can see it's not available quite yet in this version, but it will be included in a future release. But you can view the details of the changes in the employee audit report. If I close out of there, you can find that in other reports and on the employee tab. And it's just this report here. If I go ahead and preview that, just so you can get a view of what that looks like, you can see I've got my 4 employees on there. And I can see when that AEPN has been applied and what changes that it's made to the employee. So definitely want to use whilst we wait on that AEPN log, but that will be released in due course. So that is it for period 1. That is period 1, all processed, done and dusted, with a couple of extra steps to bear in mind for 2026.